Welcome. We are visiting the provisions of the Indian Contract Act. In the previous session, we have taken up sections 10 to 13. Today, we will be visiting provisions of sections 14 to 18, or perhaps up till 17 only. Section 14 is defining free consent. Section 15 defines coercion, 16 defines undue influence, and 17 defines fraud. 18 is about misrepresentation. Let us now visit the text of section 14. It reads as under: free consent defined means here in this section, free consent is being defined. Consent is said to be free when it is not caused by. See, the definition is in a negative form, means it states that the consent will not be free if the situations as are mentioned in subsection 1 to 5 will be there. So, consent is to be taken to be a free consent unless and until the same falls within 1 to 5 situations legislated here in section 14. First situation is coercion as defined in section 15. That means if it is coercion, means as it is defined in 15, then it will not be free consent. Then undue influence as defined in section 16, fraud as defined in section 17, and misrepresentation as is defined in section 18, or mistake subject to the provision of section 20, 21, 22. Consent is said to be caused when it would not have been given but for the existence of such coercion, undue influence, fraud, misrepresentation, or mistake. 5 different situations are being categorized as specified situations which will not make the consent to be a free consent. These 5 situations are coercion, undue influence, fraud, misrepresentation, and mistake. Now, coercion, undue influence, fraud, misrepresentation, mistake have been specifically, distinctively defined. The legislature here is making itself very specific as what is going to be coercion, what is going to be undue influence, what is going to be fraud, what is going to be misrepresentation, and what is going to be a mistake. So here in section 14, simply 5 situations are being specified as which will not make the consent to be free consent. However, these 5 situations as these are here in section 14 itself, are specified that these are going to be as per the definitions given in sections 15, 16, 17, and 18 respectively. However, as far as the 5th category of mistakes is concerned, same is made subject to the provisions of section 20, 21, and 22. Therefore, while we will be appreciating the domain of mistakes, we have to be cautious as that the same is subject to the provisions of section 20, 21, and 22. Therefore, free consent as is defined in section 14 is in a negative form. Means there are five different situations which are excluded. It impliedly means the consent is a free consent. Consent is to be taken as a free consent unless and until same falls within the five situations of coercion, undue influence, fraud, misrepresentation, and a mistake. So this section 14 as such is impliedly conveying that every consent will be taken as a free consent unless and until same falls within one of the five situations. Now let us visit the situations as stand legislated and as having the seal of the legislature, so these are enforceable. Coercion is defined in section 15. Let us read it. Coercion is the committing or treating to commit, threatening to commit any act forbidden by the Indian Penal Code or the unlawful detaining or threatening to death any property to the prejudice of any person whatsoever with the intention of causing any person to enter into an agreement. See, coercion as is defined is essentially taking us to the domain of the Indian Penal Code. Therefore, the appreciation of the ingredients of coercion will essentially focus as that it is going to be of the nature of the offenses, forbidden situations of the Indian Penal Code. Coercion is the committing or threatening to commit. There are two things. Number one, committing. Second is threatening to commit. Both these situations, when there is any situation of any act forbidden by the Indian Penal Code, all what is forbidden by the Indian Penal Code means what? All that has been made an offense under the Indian Penal Code. So, coercion is the committing or threatening to commit any act forbidden by Indian Penal Code. So, coercion is in a way the commission or attempt to commit the forbidden acts of the Indian Penal Code. Further, or the unlawful detaining. Now, unlawful detaining as such may not be punishable, or if at all is punishable, still it is being taken specifically as that the acts forbidden by Indian Penal Code or the unlawful detaining in a way is extra cautious attention of the legislature that if there is some unlawful detaining which is not prohibited under the Indian Penal Code, even then same will come within the four corners of the coercion here. So, acts forbidden by Indian Penal Code. Secondly, unlawful detaining. Third, threatening to death, threatening to detain any property. So here it is unlawful detaining or threatening to detain any property to the prejudice of any person, whoever. So here, the detention or threatening to detention of any property to the prejudice of any person whatsoever. So, if A is a party to a contract, and if detaining, threatening to detain of any property is to the prejudice of any person, not necessarily the party himself to the contract. If there is a contract between A and B, and if there is threatening to detain any property, the prejudice of any person, not necessarily A, which is a party, with an intention of causing any person to enter into an agreement. So if A is a party to a contract, if there is unlawful detaining or threatening to detain any property to the prejudice of any person whatsoever, but the same is with the intention of causing any person to enter into an agreement. Now, here, any person is used, and it shall be implied as that it is not necessary that this any person should be the one who is a party to the contract. This threat can be for prejudice to any other person than the one who is a party to the contract, but the intention of detaining or threatening to detain, maybe with respect to the third person, should be for the person who is a party to the contract to enter into an agreement. So if A is a party to a contract and there is threat or attempt to threat to any property of any other person, but if the same is with the intention that A shall enter into a contract, then it will be falling within the four corners of coercion as is defined under section 15. The situation of coercion has been widely extended, aiming to exclude any type of coercion upon the party to enter into a contract. So this legislative policy, this legislative enactment, this definition of coercion is very wide, and here the circumstances being covered and brought within the four corners of the definition of coercion are such that the same ensures that there does not happen any coercion upon the party to a contract. Now, section 16 defines undue influence. From coercion, which is of greater intensity, now in section 16, we are reaching at another situations, undue influence, which may not be as intense situations, but otherwise as far as the concept of free consent is concerned, same as well has been taken a forbidden situation. Let us read it. Subsection 1. A contract is said to be induced by undue influence, where the relations subsisting between the parties are such that one of the parties in a position to dominate the will of the other and uses the position to obtain an unfair advantage over the other. See, in real life, when two persons are connected or related, then situations will arise when out of the two, one may be in a dominating position over the other. And if this position is used to take unfair advantage, then the same is coming within the four corners of undue influence. We can imagine A, a senior officer, and B, a subordinate. And this relationship may, if is availed and used, it may result into the unfair advantage. A prisoner and a superintendent of jail also may give rise to such situations. And in society, there are many such like situations which may have advantage for one person over the other person, and if the same is of such influence of resulting into unfair advantage, then the same as well has been brought within the category of undue influence. Now, in class second, it is added in particular and without prejudice to the generality of the foregoing principle. See, the class 1 of undue influence is otherwise a very wide clause, and out of it, it is further made specific by stating that in particular and without prejudice to the general of the foregoing principle, a person is deemed to be in a position to dominate the will of the another. So here, some situations are being expressly enlisted as the same to be resulting into a person to be in a dominating position. Now, one word used here is a foregoing principle. Therefore, the clause 1 of section 16 is to be interpreted as a principle. So, the undue influence definition as is enunciated in 16.1 is as a principle, and subclass 2 is specifying the enlisted situations being of the nature that same to be accepted with the recognition of law, the seal of the legislature as a position to dominate the will of another. Now see what these particular enlisted situations are. A, where he holds a real or apparent authority over the other, or where he stands in fiduciary relation to the other. Now, fiduciary relations are taken to be the situations where there may be the situations of dominance of one over the other. And the other word used here is authority. So when there is an authority of A over B, then the same may be a situation for consideration of the existence of dominance because of an authority or because of fiduciary relations, that the undue influence may result into. The next specific situation being enlisted is in section 16(2)(b), where he takes a contract with a person whose mental capacity is temporarily or permanently affected by reason of age, illness, or mental or bodily distress. So, this specific situation is a large category of reality, and the same is that when there is a contract between A and B, and when the position of B is of mental capacity of the nature, that same is temporarily or permanently affected by reason of age, illness, or mental or bodily distress. The word used is distress. Now, this distress may be bodily or of mental state. Further, it may be affected because of an age, illness as well. So, age, illness, and mental or bodily stress, if the same has affected the capacity, may it be temporarily or permanently, then the cumulative effect of such realistic position as well is being categorized as a particular situation where the undue influence is to be presumed. Therefore, while we as lawyers will be confronted with this situation to determine whether or not the contract has been there because of undue influence, then first of all, we have to go by the general principle as is enunciated in subsection 1 of section 16. And then further, we also have to apply the touchstone of the particular situations mentioned here in 2A and 2B. Now, subsection 3 of section 16 goes further, where a person who is in a position to dominate the will of another or enters into a contract with him, and the transaction appears on the face of it or on the evidence adduced to be unconsentable. The burden of proving that such content was not influenced by undue will shall be upon the person who is in a position to dominate the will of the other. However, it is simultaneously added, nothing this subsection shall affect the provisions of section 111 of the Indian Evidence Act. Here, in the Contract Act, a rule of evidence, the presumption has been enunciated. This enunciation is laying down the sequence in which the plea of undue influence is to be proved, and here the burden has been cast upon the person who is in the dominating position over the other. It is this presumption of the nature of the law of evidence and burden of proof which is of great practical importance. So, inherently in this clause, there is a presumption of existence of undue influence, and to rebut it, the burden has been cast by the legislature upon the person who is in a dominating position. Thank you very much.